of feel like, look, as long as Meghan isn't making any more Netflix documentaries that I am then compelled to watch so that I can then have an opinion about them, like, that's fine. Let them carry on.
Let's move on. I want to talk about obviously the biggest story of the day, of the day, which is what the kids are already calling the Megtrance. Harry and Meghan's plan to return to the UK next month. Previously, the Duke of Sussex said that it wouldn't be safe for his family to return, but things have clearly changed. Sarah, are you bringing out the bunting already?
Please, no.
What a birthday present just for you.
What a gift. I can't have any more Harry and Meghan takes. My take well has been exhausted quite some time ago. One of the really weird things about being a journalist is that I never really thought very much about the royal family before I was a journalist writing comment pieces, and then all of a sudden I was sort of exposed to the incredible levels of not even monarchism, but just feelings about the royal family that exist in this country that I had somehow managed to cut myself off from in my little bubble before I was working as a journalist. People really care about this stuff, and I kind of feel like, look, as long as Meghan isn't making any more Netflix documentaries that I am then compelled to watch so that I can then have an opinion about them, like, that's fine. Let them carry on, please. I mean, Harry's just had this, the absolute humiliation of losing his High Court battle against, particularly the Daily Mail. That has been a very expensive, very humiliating route, and perhaps, hopefully, will sort of mark the end of his war on everything. And this is, a rapprochement with his elderly father, his very elderly father. Charles is not going to be around for much longer. Then allow it to happen, but please no more Netflix documentaries, please. That's my only proviso.
Understood. Jimmy, I could ask you about Harry and Meghan, but I'd rather ask you about Downing Street, because Sue Gray has said that working in Keir Starmer's Downing Street as his chief of staff was unbearable. Here she is speaking to the Political Currency podcast.
It was definitely unbearable, particularly for me, and I would say that none of that briefing came from me. I think it was very difficult, and it was just affecting, me and my life. And, I was getting into the office very early in the morning. I was leaving late to avoid, it was very, very, very difficult period.
Jimmy, you also worked in Downing Street, as we said earlier, a mere 5 prime ministers ago. Was it ever unbearable?
It's definitely really challenging at points, I think. There's a great wave when you start, and Andy Burnham's going through this, that people are excited, you're doing stuff, you're achieving things, but then problems arise and it becomes a real challenge. I was there under Theresa May. We faced various meaningful votes and leadership challenges and so on. And I do remember as a group of special advisors being a bit sort of morbid outside the cabinet room, and it was actually Times columnist Danny Finkelstein that was there and pointed out to us sort of young 20, 30-somethings. He was like, just bear in mind that is the cabinet room, and you are very privileged to be here, and you can achieve a lot in this job, and you do need people that can fire you up. And so it's quite surprising to hear sort of Sue Gray say that as the chief of staff, actually, that it was unbearable, particularly in the first 100 days. That should be at least...
You should be walking on sunshine.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
And that should be the time when you can get stuff achieved, and optimism is high, and Andy Burnham's clearly doing a good job of that at the moment. Challenges will come. But yeah, so I was a bit surprised by the kind of unbearable remarks. I mean, it is enormously challenging at times, and there's definitely... People have challenges around mental health. There isn't much support for special advisors and so on. Poor special advisors get the world's smallest violin out, etc. But there isn't much guidance there, and there isn't much support for them. So it is a challenge.
Sarah, you've written a review of a book called The Castle for The Times, which explores some of the wackier figures in the manosphere and suggests that men might be drawn into toxic masculinity by a lack of good jobs. Tell us about that briefly.
Yeah, so new book by John Ronson, hugely entertaining journalist. He's always kind of made a specialism of exploring the kind of madder and weirder fringes of society. I think the first time I came across Ronson was I watched one of his TV documentaries where he went to a David Icke conference and asked a bunch of people whether they really thought it was lizards running the world.
I remember it well. To which the answer was yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is lizards. Um, but the varieties of human madness have really progressed and refined over the sort of 30 years, I guess, since I would have watched that documentary. And he has now written a book where he just kind of really digs into this the sort of the fracturing of especially the kind of middle-aged male psyche, this kind of, and it's a thing that I have definitely kind of observed in my life, this phenomenon of men kind of hitting the point where perhaps a while ago they would have had the sort of classic midlife crisis, maybe bought a fancy car, or had an inappropriate leather jacket, or an ill-advised affair or something like that. But instead of doing any of those classic male midlife crisis things, they're sort of reaching into they're driving themselves insane on the internet. They're becoming, so one of the subjects here is Graham Linehan, who is a friend / former friend of John Ronson, who has obviously dug himself really hard into this whole sort of angry person on the internet character, to the point that it has basically exploded his entire life. And so Ronson is kind of looking at how does this tie into a sort of an absence of meaning and structure for men. If you're not in an economy where you can make stuff, if you don't have a sort of a professional identity to fall back on. One of the things that happened to Linehan was that he did lose his work, and that kind of contributed to his escalation. Then where do you go? And the answer in a lot of these cases seems to be on the internet, and God help you once you're in there.
Jimmy, spending so much time thinking about and how young people can get jobs, I guess what we're talking about here is what might happen to some of them if they don't.
Exactly. And we have got 1 million under 24s in the United Kingdom not in education, training or work. That is a huge challenge. I think one of the problems with this is that 50 years ago, which is actually not that long when you look at the course of human history, essentially the male job was defined by brawn and often going underground and shoveling coal, etc. That rapidly changed in the following 30 years towards a kind of knowledge, professional economy and so on. And we didn't prepare the transition well enough for that. I think you can say many things about the Thatcher period and the coal miners' strikes and so on, but we did not prepare those people. And I think we are potentially at the start of another age of that in the AI, where knowledge becomes across the board, equal access for everyone, and the knowledge economy is going to finish, and we're going to have a whole load of people again that we're going to need to retrain and find employment for. And I think it is one of the biggest challenges that faces the country that we don't really talk about enough. At the moment, you can see it in the million unemployed under the age of 24. That is a shocking statistic. And if it happens at that age, they're not going to be able to get jobs further down the line.
Yeah, fascinating and terrifying as well. Look, we're nearly out of time, so let's rush this one through. The owners of a Titanic-themed ride at a farm in Hertfordshire have been criticised for being disrespectful to victims of the disaster. The ride sees the replica ship lift at one end to slide customers down towards the other. Farm manager Will Campbell-Gray says, "We're keeping the memory of the Titanic alive and we're not making fun of the dead at all." What do you think, Jimmy? Is this disrespectful?
I just think it's bizarre. I can't imagine the meeting that happened where people thought this was a good idea. I mean, it sounds like a David Brent office sketch.
What do you think, Sarah? So I've seen photos of this. It doesn't look much like the Titanic. It looks like a bus on stilts. And exactly what the Titanic has to do with the farm in Hertfordshire, I'm not totally sure. What do you think?
The whole thing is quite bizarre. It seems to just be like a farmer and his wife who've set this up on their ground as a sort of a little side money spinner. My favourite bit of the story is the guy, when he was asked about it, explained that they'd changed the name to, I don't know, something else like the Super Slider or something after complaints about it being the Titanic ride, and had then had even more abuse from people attacking them for capitulating to, quote unquote, the woke mob, at which point they changed it back to the Titanic.